Okay, I think it's time for us to begin, right?
Yeah.
Welcome, Ned.
Hi, Ned.
So welcome back, everyone. Eric, good to see you. So we're going to have 2 sessions this month, in the month of December, and I'm always a little wistful after Hanukkah ends, and then it comes on the calendar the 8th day of Hanukkah when we've already lit the candles the night before, and it's like, wait, can't we light some more? But we did finish Hanukkah, and I think our job going forth into this new month of Tevet is to keep increasing light in the world, because that's what we did for the 8 days of Hanukkah. And especially, I mean, this is the darkest time in the year, and we need to find sources of light. So may we begin our evening together thinking about how we can be sources of light. I'm very happy to be back, and Susan is going to bring up our bracha so that we can begin our study together. And I'm fine with us unmuting and being cacophonous. Let's say it together. Baruch
atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of all, who houses us with mitzvot, commanding us to engage with words of Torah.
Amen. Amen. So we have arrived at a really amazing Torah portion this week. We are in the Joseph cycle, and it's always a very powerful cycle of stories. We read it every year at this time. Miketz is usually read on the Shabbat during Hanukkah. And now we're at Vayigash, and the story is very, very powerful because we began the Joseph cycle with this bratty brother who seems to be a know-it-all, and his 9 brothers gang up against him, and some of them want to sell him and some of them want to kill him. But what they do, as you know, is they sell him to a passing band who take him down to Egypt. And then he has a series of falls and falling down and getting back up. So falls down into the pit, is brought up into Egypt, and then he comes into Pharaoh's household and begins to be very trusted, but then has an encounter with Mrs. Potiphar that doesn't go well, and he ends up in jail. And then his dreams help some others get out of prison, and then he too comes out of prison, makes a connection with the Pharaoh, and helps him interpret his dreams, which enable him, Joseph, to rise and become a person of great power. Meanwhile, as you all know this story, that the famine that he predicts takes over the land, and his own brothers have to come seeking food from him. And he sees them. They have no idea who he is because he is dressed in the clothes of a monarch, or a courtier, a high-level courtier. And there's a question, even as we read the Torah, the rabbis of old have a good time with this. What language is he speaking? Is he fluent in Egyptian, but even speaks Egyptian to his brothers, and they need an interpreter, but of course he understands everything they're saying to each other. And as you know, he sends them away after asking them about their father, his father, and he says that they must come back with his youngest brother. And when they come back with his younger brother, he plants his chalice, his cup, in his brother Benjamin's sack, and it looks as if he's stolen it. And the palace guards that have followed them then bring the whole family back in, and Joseph threatens to keep his younger brother to enslave him and let the others go. And that's when our Torah portion for this week opens. So we have a very, very powerful opening with Judah, one of the instigators of Joseph's being thrown into the pit. He's had some life experiences in the interim. He's lost 2 sons, and he's had this encounter with Tamar, who tricks him into impregnating her because he is keeping his 3rd son from her. You'll go back and read this if this is unfamiliar, but this all piles up. And so what we see is amazing kind of psychological growth and maturity in Judah. And the Torah portion opens with Judah speaking to Joseph, reminding Joseph, kind of going over the whole story in the way that the Torah does to kind of catch us up. And I wanted to share with you, I didn't send this to Susan, so I'm going to read it right out of the Torah on Women's Commentary. There's a wonderful Bible interpreter and translator who those of you who care about this should be aware of. His name is Robert Alter, and he's done beautiful Torah translations. And this is what he writes about this portion. What is it like, the biblical writers seek to know through their art, to be a human being with a divided consciousness, intermittently loving your brother, but hating him even more, resentful or perhaps contemptuous of your father, but also capable of the deepest filial regard, stumbling between disastrous ignorance and imperfect knowledge, fiercely asserting your own independence, but caught in a tissue of events divinely contrived. Outwardly, a definite character, and inwardly, an unstable vortex of greed, ambition, jealousy, lust, piety, courage, compassion, and much more. So I love the way that Alter speaks about what's going on in the whole Torah, of course, but particularly in this very, very powerful story. So we begin the portion by seeing how Judah approaches Joseph. And I actually, Susan, I didn't tell you that I wanted to look at this, but I'm wondering if you can get Sefaria chapter 44 up for us. All right, so we're trying a new way. You are so awesome. So this is 45, and we'll just go up one to go up to 44. Hopefully. Here we are. Amazing. Okay, so I would love a reader, because if by reading this out loud, we're going to get a sense of where we are in the story. And where I really want to go is to chapter 45, but 44 sets us up. So Wesley, would you start by reading for us, please?
Then he instructed his house steward as follows: fill the men's bags with food, as much as they can carry, and put each one's money in the mouth of his bag. Put my silver goblet.
What? I'm sorry, I am going to interrupt you, because That's from the last portion. And this new portion starts at verse 18. So Susan followed my instructions and they were wrong. Okay, so now we're going to start with verse 18. And this is where this portion starts. Thank you, Wesley, for beginning.
Then Judah went up to him and said, "Please, my lord, let your servant appeal to my lord, and do not be impatient with your servant. You are the equal of Pharaoh." Okay, stop right there. All right, so the portion begins where Judah is approaching his brother. And the first, you've heard this a million times from everyone who's ever taught Torah to you or with you, that the first word of the portion is the name of the portion, Vayigash Elav, and he approached him. Oh, and then the third word is Yehuda, his name. So Judah approached him and he said, and this is very lovely, "Be Adoni, by your leave, my lord." But what it could also mean is in me, Adoni, in my heart, my lord. And then, of course, there's a double entendre here of Adoni with Adonai. So when you know, in the like lords and ladies, so my lord, but it's also God. So one could ask, is Judah thinking about what is godlike in him and recognizing what is godlike in his brother? So in this very first sentence, Vayomer bi Adoni, Yedaber na avdecha, Daber be'oznei Adoni. All right, so by your leave, my lord, that's at least the translation I'm reading, and it's somewhat different in the one you've got. Please give your servant a hearing. So the whole idea of when we approach anyone, you know, will you listen to me? I'm standing here before you. Okay. Wesley, keep going, please. Oh, wait, for you are like Pharaoh. So this is also this line that Wesley just read. I am standing before somebody who is as powerful as Pharaoh. Will you hear me? And of course, he doesn't know. He's standing before his brother. All right, keep going. My lord asked his servants, "Have you a father or another brother?" We told my lord, "We have an old father, and there is a child of his old age, the youngest. His full brother is dead, so that he alone is left of his mother, and his father dotes on him."
All right, so here, his brother is dead. The man I'm talking to is the dead brother. He doesn't know that. He's telling him his brother is dead. Keep going. And what he's doing here is he's reminding Joseph of what Joseph said previously. Go ahead.
Then you said to your servants, "Bring him down to me that I may set eyes on him." We said to my lord, "The boy cannot leave his father. If he were to leave him, his father would die." But you said to your servants, "Unless your youngest brother comes down with you, do not let me see your faces." When we came back to your servant, my father, we reported my lord's words to him.
Keep going.
Later, our father said, "Go back and prepare some food for us." We answered, "We cannot go down. Only if our youngest brother is with us can we go down, for we may not show our faces to the man unless our younger brother is with us." Your servant, my father, said to us, "As you know, my wife bore me 2 sons, but one is gone from me." And I said, "Alas, he was torn by a beast, and I have not seen him since."
Keep going.
If you take this one from me too, and he meets with disaster, you will send my white head down to Sheol in sorrow. Now, if I come.
So now stop. So the emotional power here is just enormous. So here, Judah is repeating to Joseph what his father said, and his father, Isaac, is telling this story that he's repeating has this lie in it, embedded in it. Surely he's been ripped to shreds. All of the brothers know that they were the ones who put the blood on the garment. They don't know for sure what happened to their brother. Maybe he was ripped to shreds, but they created this ruse. So here, this very complex story of not even knowing whether he's alive or dead. And now it's being told again to Joseph. All right, so let's go on with verse 30.
Now, if I come to your servant, my father, and the boy is not with us, since his own life is so bound up with his, when he sees that the boy is not with us, he will die, and your servants will send the white head of your servant, our father, down to Sheol in grief.
Keep going.
Now, if your servant has pledged himself for the boy to my father, saying, if I do not bring him back to you, I shall stand guiltily before my father forever. Therefore, please let your servant remain as a slave to my lord instead of the boy, and let the boy go back with his brothers. For how can I go back to my father unless the boy is with me? Let me not be witness to the woe that would overtake my father.
All right, so what's happening here is that we're seeing a transformation in Judah. So Judah is essentially saying, I'll go, and you cannot keep Benjamin here. Take me instead. So now, please let your servant, me, Judah, remain as my Lord's slave in place of the lad, Benjamin, and let the lad, Benjamin, go home with his brothers. For how can I go home to my father, Isaac, without Benjamin, and thus see the harm my father will suffer? So we have this very, very emotional setup. And then we have the beginning of chapter 45. So even when we've read this a million times, I think it's enormously powerful. And I'm going to invite Fred to read next, please. Chapter 45, verse 1.
Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, "Have everyone withdraw from me." So there was no one else about when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. His sobs were so loud that the Egyptians could hear, and so the news reached Pharaoh's palace. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still well?" But his brothers could not answer him. So dumbfounded were they on account of him.
So we're going to stop for a minute. I want to know how this is striking you and what you're remembering of the story, even if it was told to you many, many years ago, or just hearing it tonight. Yeah, Fred.
Something that really sort of stands out to me, Rabbi, is I think it's almost astounding that Judah doesn't recognize his brother. I mean, it's like so. I think that's fascinating to me that the brother is in such a different place that he has no clue that that's his brother. And I'm trying to put that in my head with my brothers or something like that. Had it been such a long time, and would they look different? But that stands out to me. It's very interesting how he's in such a different place from the other. So that's a standout to me.
Others. Anyone else want to say anything?
Yeah, I'll say something, which is maybe, how I think we've all had that experience where you see somebody, in a different place that you've never seen them before, and you can't place them. So is it possible that is going on? I don't know if that's really true or not. If it were my brother, I think I would still recognize him. Or could it be just the brothers? Maybe they did know who he was and didn't want to. They didn't know how to process it. They didn't know how to. How could this be? This really can't be my brother. So I'm just not going to go there and address him as my brother. This can't be true. A little denial.
Anyone else?
Ellen's hand is up.
Ah, Ellen, thank you for helping me here.
So I was looking at it from Joseph's point of view. So on the one hand, he is still sort of creating this sort of ruse, hiding the cup. So he's sort of operating on that level. But I don't think this is the first time he cries during this scene. I think he cries at least once previously. So I think it was taking a huge emotional toll on him, because unlike Judah, he did know that these were his brothers. I think it is very emotionally powerful to read it and to imagine how Joseph was feeling, hearing this lie, hearing about his father, and I'm sure as Alter says, harboring a lot of ill will, considering what his brothers did to him, and yet having a lot of love for his brothers too.
So here, decades have passed. Decades. I mean, he was a kid. He was a teenage boy when they threw him into the pit. And here he is, a man of 40, 50 years old. So Fred, I appreciate what you've said, but if decades passed and we didn't see even someone who was our sibling, and, as I mentioned before, we don't know what language, the whole issue of language here, but also the context. And as Ned said, when people change context, we get disoriented. So according to the text, they really didn't know. But he knew from day one. He knew the minute they came in that these were his brothers. So Joseph, has already had time to think about his response to them. And it's been pretty complex. And as Ellen points out, this is the third of 4 times that Joseph weeps with emotion over his brothers. I mean, he's just overwhelmed. And the idea of the sobs being heard throughout the palace, I mean, I don't know, are there movies that we've seen that include this, an enactment of this? Just the palace, a great big room, and the whole idea of the echoes that would be in a room like that, of this grown man sobbing.
With no Bluetooth speakers to amplify his voice.
Huh. So, the brothers are unable to answer him. They recoiled in fear of him. So that's the other thing we're talking about, is they know what they've done to him. What's he going to do now? It's such a complicated thing. Oh my God, he knows who we are. Is this really who he is? He's in a position of power. And who are we? Is he going to kill us now? Has he been stringing us along to murder us? It's just so. Let's go to line 4. Eric, would you be willing to read verse 4?
Sure. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come forward to me." And when they came forward, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, he whom you sold into Egypt. Now do not be distressed or reproach yourselves because you sold me hither. It was to save life that God sent me ahead of you. It is now 2 years that there has been famine in the land, and there are still 5 years to come in which there shall be no yield from tilling."
One more verse.
God has sent me ahead of you to ensure your survival on earth and to save your lives in an extraordinary deliverance.
And then he repeats part of this line. Let's go on for 8, please.
So it was not you who sent me here, but God, and he has made me a father to Pharaoh, lord of all in his household, and ruler over the whole land of Egypt.
Wow. So here also the play of he has made me a father to Pharaoh. I, who have not had a father through my adulthood, have become the father of the greatest man in the land. Joseph also was a father of his own children, but this image of being a father, and actually the image of father and son is both in the Torah, but also particularly in rabbinic literature, where anyone who teaches another becomes called his father. Fred.
Something that really stands out to me, I think of the word beshert, meant to be. I think it's interesting how he's able to, all this happened to him and via his brothers, but he was able to like say to himself, this is what God wanted. I think that really is another one that's like, whoa, that's incredible that he can see it that way.
Anyone want to respond or carry that on a little bit? So this is Joseph, who early on, when Pharaoh asked him about the dream interpretation, said, listen, Pharaoh, it's not me. These interpretations come from God. Joseph was really clear early on, not when he was a child, not when he was telling his brothers what he dreamt, but later on in his life, he realizes his own relationship with the divine, and that whatever gifts he has are not his, are not from anything he did. They were not earned. So here, so what Fred is talking about is not something that just happens now. This is an articulation of a position that he's had, that he has developed. And so part of what we are fortunate to be able to see is the growth of the character. We're seeing both the growth of Judah and the growth of Joseph himself. And in some ways, I mean, of course, we see the growth and development of Isaac as well. So anyone else want to jump in before we read a few more verses? Okay, so we were up to verse 9, and let's have Eve, would you like to read?
Yeah, sure. Now hurry back to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me without delay. You will dwell in the region of Goshen, where you will be near me, you and your children and your grandchildren, your flocks and herds, and all that is yours. There I will provide for you, for there are yet 5 years of famine to come, that you and your household and all that is yours may not suffer want. You can see for yourselves, and my brother Benjamin for himself, that it is indeed I who am speaking to you. And you must tell my father everything about my high station in Egypt and all that you have seen, and bring my father here with all speed. With that, he embraced his brother Benjamin around the neck and wept, and Benjamin wept on his neck. He kissed all his brothers and wept upon them. Only then were his brothers able to talk to him. The news reached Pharaoh's palace.
Stop there.
Okay.
And I just want to invite each of us, and please forgive my own emotionality here, my own emotions, that when someone else begins to cry with a full heart, what happens to us? So that's what's in this story. And I think we've all had that experience, that even when we thought we were fine or whatever it was, when someone else starts to cry, something in us begins to melt. And that's exactly what's happening here. Both between Joseph and Benjamin, and then between Joseph and all the brothers. He kissed all his brothers and wept with them. Only after this could his brothers respond to him. So, I'm inviting each of us to think about what helps us to really feel, to really be emotionally present with another person. And for some of us, it's really, really hard. But I'm wondering if you can think of times when someone else's tears has enabled you to access deeper feeling in yourself. And if you'd like to share, that would be lovely. And if not, that's okay too.
Well, so I want to share and say that when I know that in situations where I've been with other people and they've cried, one, I'm listening, so you have to be a good listener. And you have to be a good listener, and it is not, it's like not so much, the empathy is not so much around the story that the person's crying, but just that the person is crying. That so the person in front of me, like, so recently David's mom passed away. And so I was able to be there for him and listen to what he was thinking and feeling. And so despite the fact, not even despite the fact, but I knew and loved his mother, but my heart was broken for David. My heart was broken, that his mom passed, but my thoughts and feelings were always about what that was doing to my husband. And would he survive? And and so it was important to me to listen to what he was saying all the time, and then just to that empathy for somebody that I love whose heart was broken, and so being able to observe that in his life, listening to that, I think really brought me to a deeper place around the whole situation of David losing his mom.
Thank you for sharing that.
I'm
Yeah.
aware, I would say identification. I'm thinking of a woman who I know who's just lost her son. Now, this woman is a little older than I am. Her son could be my son's age. And it's kind of, I felt so, I don't know her. I know her, but not that well. But just talking to her, it's kind of like I put myself in her place. It's like losing your child is just horrific. I didn't know her son. I started crying. It's like, it's that idea. It's so sad to me. But I think, I don't, it almost sounds hard. All I could say is I felt like I was her. It was like I was identifying with her.
So two beautiful stories of opening hearts when someone else is sharing something deeply. Ned?
Yeah, lots of thoughts. You know, I'm struck by the first, by the phrase where it says, where is it? And says he kissed all his brothers and wept upon them. Only then were his brothers able to talk to him. And I think that just speaks of a lot about the connection between he and his brothers and how deep it was and what a bonding moment that was. Because everyone that says to me that everybody was so overcome with emotion, perhaps, that they could not even speak, and they had to just let that emotion come out before they could actually verbalize what they were experiencing. So that's one thought. And then, I'm a clinical social worker, so as a professional, I deal with this every day that I work. And I have lots of thoughts, but I'll just, suffice it to say, it's just to recognize how hardwired we are to have these kinds of connections. And I think back to our young, when are very, very young, our children, or even our infants and our babies, that are how they learn to kind of regulate their emotions based on how they are with their mother or their father, and they really, when the mother or the father feels happy, a baby will tend to feel happier, and if the parent is not so happy, they're not going to feel so happy. If the baby notices that there's nobody around, it doesn't take more than about 2 minutes before that infant or that child is crying uncontrollably because they don't feel safe. So I guess, safety is another piece of this. They all felt, safe enough to have this experience, Joseph and his brothers. But it's just such a universal experience.
I have a question. I have a question, Sue. So
Yes.
when it says he kissed all his brothers and wept upon them, only then were his brothers able to talk to him. I have this sense, that his brothers weren't kind to him. They put him in a pit, and they did lots of awful things to him. So I'm wondering whether or not it was only when they saw that he was crying upon them, that he had these feelings, that they were able to talk to him, because they saw that he did not hate them. Maybe he did not want to hurt them or bring sadness onto them the way they brought it onto him. So I'm thinking, once they saw Joseph crying, then they probably felt, well, okay, he's not going to do anything major to us. I mean, because Joseph is like, he's got the power, and he could, he can jail them. I mean, he could do anything he wanted. Pharaoh's not going to, I think, argue with him about these brothers that he wants to jail. So I think maybe his brothers don't know what are they going to what to expect from Joseph. And so it's only when Joseph cries and they see that, well, he obviously does care, that they are able to talk to him and let their guard down.
When he breaks down and cries, that makes him real. It humanizes him. I'm thinking, when someone shows their emotion to me, that draws me in.
I wanted to add, for me, I feel a sense of safety when there's an intense situation and somebody else shows emotion or cries. It then lends the ability for me to cry too. And, oh, okay, it's okay for me to feel sad right now. And I feel this, like this particular loved ones that I'm around during an intense situation. I will then feel safe that I can feel those feelings as well, as opposed to feeling that I'm not allowed to feel those feelings. And then the opposite is also true. When I don't feel safe, I will not show those emotions, just kind of what the other folks were just talking about. So I have a hard relationship with my mom, and my grandmother just passed away last week, but I won't show emotion in front of my mom because I'm not safe to, you know? So it's interesting how it goes both ways, but then it's also showing, perhaps as the others were saying, that showing safety, that they could cry.
Thank you, Elisa. So here, Joseph has actually tried to reassure his brothers that he's not going to take revenge on them. You know, he says, God sent me. This is not your doing. And there have already been 2 years of famine. God sent me ahead of you. Don't be troubled. This is line 5. Don't, and the translation's a little different than I'm reading. Don't be chagrined because you sold me here, for it was to save lives that God sent me here. So Joseph is trying to reassure them that he's not going to take revenge. So what we see here is this real maturity in Joseph, who he's able to forgive his brothers for what happened, that he's grown up enough. And where have they been? I mean, that's part of why I wanted to begin the portion by reading the part about Judah, because clearly Judah has changed. What about the others? You know, have they realized that they did a terrible thing? And does that matter? And the one thing we haven't talked about, this is Torah Queeries after all, is the fact that Joseph is often seen as a gay character in this story, that he's the one who has the flamboyant coat, you know, the coat of many colors, and he's the favorite child, and he is rejected by his brothers and thrown into this pit. And whether or not we see him as a gay character, what we do see that he is a character who has the power to forgive even this most horrendous hurt, this rejection, this being made fun of, and being left for dead. I mean, they come back and the pit's empty, the brothers. That happened way earlier. We have to go back and reread the whole story to remember all the details, but they're not sure what happened. No, did a wild beast eat him or, you know, rip him to shreds? That's what they tell the father. But this is a story of amazing forgiveness. And in the book that we have often looked at, the Torah Queeries book, Rabbi Denise Egger writes a chapter on the power of forgiveness and what does that mean for gay folks to forgive those who have hurt us and continue to, because we're living in a homophobic and particularly a transphobic culture. And so what does it mean for us to find a place of sufficient safety and support and community? I really appreciate Elisa bringing up safety, that we can forgive others. So a few hands up. I want to acknowledge first Ned and then Fred.
So we'll go ahead with Fred.
You can skip over me. That was from last time.
Oh, it
Sorry.
was. Okay. So
Yeah,
let's
sorry about
go
that.
with Fred.
I'll
So
take
we'll
it
go
down.
right with
Rabbi, that's interesting. I did always think about Joseph and, you know, the Technicolor Dreamcoat and how there is such a queer element to that. And part of me thinks that, look, now looking at this story from that lens, that maybe he sees growth in the fact that he got away from the sort of heterosexual family and went and moved, like he became himself. And I think about, we've talked about this before, as queer folks, we sort of have to move or go somewhere and develop our own families. So I don't know if there's some piece happening. Now that you brought that up, it's making me think of that aspect.
And thinking about the whole, being in a dungeon symbolically, being enslaved. We can also, there are gay analyses that say that that's why he wasn't really tempted by Mrs. Potiphar, because he's a gay guy. So no matter how, much she's coming on to him, he's really profoundly not interested. But we could go on and on about him. He does get married to a woman in the story and has kids, but of course that doesn't mean anything either for us. So did someone else have their hand up? Want to jump in here? So what about that issue of kind of forgiving those who have hurt us, in our culture, in our families? Is it a question of time? Clearly, there's a lot of time has passed here. Having more life experiences, being more secure in the new family, as Fred kind of articulates it, the imperative of moving away and establishing a new life, which is one of the stages of adulthood.
I think that, the more independent you are, the more self-reliant you are, the easier it is to forgive. And I think because you're what Alyssa said. Alyssa? Is it Alyssa? Is that how?
Eliza.
What Eliza says about feeling safe. And, when you are self-reliant, there's absolutely a factor of safety there. You're on your own, you're independent. You'll do it yourself. It's your decision. And that it may not be the right decision, but when you make it, you think it's the right decision. So I think that Joseph, he's made it. He's, he has a great relationship with Pharaoh. He's very successful. So it's easy to forgive. It may be, it's hard to forgive given that it's his family and they've really hurt him. But I think being self-reliant gives you the what's the word? The magnanimity to deal with other people.
Thank you. Ellen.
So I was also struck by what Eliza said, and also Ned, about coming to a safe place and also having a chosen family. And one of the times, Rabbi, that while you were in Israel, we had Rabbi Rachel Pass teach us, and she said that there's some commentary that Joseph was in a love relationship with Pharaoh, that Pharaoh gives him a ring, gives him jewelry, gives him new clothes. So these are certainly things you might do to a favored courtier, but they're also things you might do to a spouse. And so maybe, he described himself as Pharaoh's father, but maybe there was love between them, which could both give him a sense of safety, as Eliza said, and the sense of a chosen family, as Fred said. So.
I'm wondering, did Rabbi Pass share one of these poems about there's a poem about that describes that relationship that's in the Women's Torah commentary. Anyway, I don't have to look for it now, but it's a beautiful poem that is kind of startling about, to those of us who haven't really thought about this relationship quite that way before. So did I see another? Here it is. I'm gonna read this poem to you. Okay, it's with the previous parsha, and it's by Elsa Lasker Schuler, a German poet who lived in the last century. It's called Pharaoh and Joseph. Pharaoh casts off his blossoming wives. They smell of Ammon's gardens. His kingly head rests on my shoulder that emanates the scent of corn. Pharaoh is made of gold. His eyes come and go like iridescent Nile waves, but his heart lies in my blood. 10 wolves ran to my wells. Pharaoh ruminates about my brothers who threw me into the pit. In sleep, his arms become pillars, threatening, but his dreamy heart thunders in my depths. Therefore, my lips compose vast sweetnesses in the wheat of our dawn. So, a beautiful erotic poem between Joseph and Pharaoh, which it may be a surprise to some of us. So it's in the Torah Women's Commentary. Those of you who have the book, you can take a look at it. There's also a wonderful, wonderful book called Joseph and the Way of Forgiveness by Stephen Mitchell, who is a poet and an amazing storyteller. I had a copy and I couldn't find it today. I went all through all of my books and I couldn't find the book to share with you. But those of you who are interested in pursuing this more, the idea of forgiveness and the whole and seeing Joseph as a character kind of created by Stephen Mitchell, but thinking more and more about the complexity of this large biblical character who keeps drawing us in year after year. So Ellen, do you want to say something else, or is your hand just still up?
No, my hand was accidentally still up, but I did want to say that for anyone interested, that Robert Alter and Stephen Mitchell have both done versions of the Book of Psalms. And although they're very different, they're both very beautiful. And I've loved both versions.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for mentioning that. So there's, of course, we can go back and read more of the story, but I think for tonight, we're getting to the end of our time together, and perhaps some of you will dream of Joseph, or of reconciliations, or of what it would mean. We didn't even talk about the incredibly emotional scene of the father, who I called Isaac twice tonight, and his name is Jacob, of Jacob realizing that Joseph is alive, and the idea of finding that your child who you thought was gone is still alive, and that you then have the opportunity to see him again. And there's a very beautiful and powerful emotional connection between Jacob, please forgive me for calling him Isaac, between Jacob and Pharaoh. So there again, so if Joseph is Pharaoh's father, than what happens when Pharaoh and Jacob meet. So this whole idea of what does it mean to serve as a parent for another? Can a young person parent an older person? I think that's pretty, we take it for granted in some ways with the elderly who need care, that and David just lost his mom and his dad is really failing, and David's siblings were caring for his mom and now caring for his dad. And so the children become like the parents, but the parents are always the parents. So this very complicated relationship that we all have at some point in our lives. We who were parented when we were little tiny people, and hopefully with some safety and love, and the way that Ned described what infants need. And not all of us had that. And so part of the challenges, one of the many challenges of adulthood, is to find places of safety and to find others who can walk with us. And whether it's explicitly reparenting or just walking with us so that we feel cared for and safe and heard and embraced when we need an embrace. So thinking about the reconciliation of these brothers and knowing that they do go and get their father, and that the family does live without want throughout the famine. Quite a story. So I look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks, all of you. And may you keep some lights burning, even though we've finished with the Hanukkah candles. We need a lot of light in this time of year and in this hard time in our history. So thank you for coming together tonight, and may you have a good evening, and I'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you, Rabbi. See you in 2 weeks.
Thank
Bye,
you,
everyone.
Rabbi.
Thank you,
Take
Rabbi.
care,
Thank you, Rabbi.
everybody.
Thank you very much.
Good night.
Good night.